this, but will that alleviate some of the pressure off of our city clerk if documents were more easily accessed on our website? Because I feel like I have to bug her for things, and when if I could just look them up. I think that every single time.
I think it would depend on what kind of documents.
I'm just one person, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it would really depend on what kind of documents you're looking for.
Everything is usually public because we've talked about them, so
right.
I can't just find them.
There are...
Hopefully that would be the case.
There are programs, and not necessarily related to the website, that helps manage documents and helps manage public records requests. That is something that we've talked about in the past during the budget process. There just hasn't been the funding for it, but we all see the need for that. The next item on the list is really just a cleanup item. The increases that the police and fire departments were entitled to based on sales tax growth for fiscal year 18-19 weren't originally projected in the budget. Now we're coming forward and asking you for authorization to amend the budget to put those line items in. It's about $300,000, and this would really just right-size the budget. The two line items for police and fire non-Measure U would have to come out of fund balance. The police and fire Measure U portion of it, which is about $76,000, would come from Measure U fund balance.
I have another question. So we are still segregating employees?
Yes, we are.
Excellent.
And then the last item we have, again, is another just cleanup house kind of things we need to keep going. IT is working on an RFP to replace our Blade server or our storage system for data and for our network at City Hall. But until that process is completed, we need a 1-year extension on the software license for our existing Blade server and the warranty on the hardware that we have in place, just to keep us protected until he can get through that, until IT and purchasing can get through that process and get the Blade server replaced. We have had it for about 6 years, so it is time to replace it. IT does have fund balance available to use toward that. It's $32,000. They do have fund balance. The balance of that money is to be used for the Blade server replacement when the time comes.
And how long will that replacement take?
Scott? Sorry, I don't have that answer.
That's okay.
Replacement of hardware takes about 6 months. So we're looking to get the RFP out. We imagine that will take probably about 2 months, 30 to 60 days to get responses back. So total time we're looking at would be about 8 months. So that's why we're moving forward with 1 year of additional warranty and software license.
And the way things move, it's probably closer to a year. Okay. Michael?
I'll challenge you, Scott, like I challenged the fire chief. Get it done in 4 months.
I'll push them.
Thank you, Scott. And on the revenue side, because we are in February, and as I was preparing this, I was looking at what we've collected year to date, not so much just through December. So looking at the various line items where I did see a little bit of growth that should be right-sized in our revenue projections is in property taxes. 2 line items specifically, RPTTF, which is hard to explain, but it's like a residual payment that comes to the city, and it has to do with the dissolution of RDA. So when RDA went away, the city started getting a small payment. We have about $750,000 projected. We got our first payment in January, and it was higher than we expected. So I'm asking to increase the revenue projection by $150,000 in that line item. The unsecured taxes, and those are taxes on like personal property or business equipment, things like that. So it's not backed by real estate. It's more like equipment if you have like a factory, the kind of equipment that you would use. We budgeted 200,000 because that's about where we were last year, and we've already collected 245,000. So I want to correct that one line item. So it's a small positive, but it is a positive by 175,000 in the general fund for property taxes. And those are all the requests that we have. Again, we're trying to be fiscally prudent and stick to our commitment to have a balanced budget. So we didn't have a lot of items to add to that. So tonight we do ask that you approve the resolution 19-05 and amend the budget for fiscal year 18-19.
Are there any members from the public that wish to speak on this item?
Yes, you have Pat Gregory who would like to speak on it.
I just listened to this presentation and it sounds pretty good. However, and this is only, this is a non-Measure U comment, so this has nothing to do with Measure U. But when I look at the adjusted budget, according to the adjusted budget, we're going to be $1 million in the red, according to this. Is that correct? That's what you say? Adjusted budget? Did anybody hear that in this presentation? That we're going to be $1 million in the red?
But that's because of carryovers from the prior year.
Got it.
And so that means that if we didn't spend it last year, we roll it forward.
Okay.
So it has funding available.
Okay, but I'm looking
We're
at
not spending anything
Got it.
additional.
I'm looking at a budget that's $1 million in the red. Whatever presentation you give, I didn't hear that up here. Didn't hear it. I heard that there's about $300,000 in additional expenditures, and things happen. I understand that. And there was about $175,000 coming in. But the $125,000 difference, where's that coming from? Where's the $1 million coming from? For at least the past 5 years, this council has continually worked in the red. For God's sake, when are you going to be fiscally responsible and work within what you have? I don't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars that I don't have. I spend what I have. But the city council seems to think that there's an infinite amount of money that, oh, let's approve this. Let's increase this. This is looking great and everything here is wonderful. But the bottom line is, once again, Hemet is in the red and you are all pushing us over to the brink. Please be fiscally responsible. Stay within a budget. You got 6 months to deal with that $1 million. Please keep Hemet safe. Thank you.
Can you please respond to some of those comments?
Yes, like I said, the $1 million probably has to do with carryovers. I don't have the carryovers in front of me because these presentations and giving you quarterly updates focuses strictly on the current year's situation, revenues and expenditures that were budgeted in the current year, not the carry forwards. Normally what happens with carryovers is if it was a project that was approved in the prior year and for whatever reason we were not able to complete it, but council approved it, we are able to roll that forward to the new year. And the assumption is if we didn't do the project, we didn't spend the money, so we have the funding available to do it.
My understanding of that is that the money was, that revenue was generated and charged in last year's budget,
Correct.
and the expenditure was not. And so the
Correct.
expenditure will be charged this year.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comment by council? City manager? Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion? I have a comment. We talked about this Measure U money and all this extra $1.7 million for the last 2 years that we may have by June. Are we that greedy that we can't take $295,000 of it and spend it towards the salaries? Or are we going to keep cutting out of our regular budget? So that would leave us only 1.4 extra on top of the 10 at the end of, do you want to speak to that, City Manager?
It's a preliminary discussion to the actual budget presentation. They've talked about a structural deficit for 5 years. The difficulty is that it's less structural than it is legislative. There are certain conditions imposed upon us that cause the deficit. The reality is, as pointed out, between the 20% set aside for emergency days and the surplus in the Measure U funds, which is technically all general fund monies, we're sitting with $16 million worth of cash that is not allocated. 8.5 waiting for the rainy day, and the 6.5 being carried over in the Measure U funds. Now, there's a resolution that restricts the salary that we're talking about to be paid out of the general fund and not Measure U.
I disagree. I signed that resolution, and it says for public safety.
But anyway, that's what we're operating under at this present time. All the raises have been taken out for public safety. All of them have been taken out of the general fund. None at this point, until you adopt this resolution, actually comes out of the Measure U funding. And so that was one constraint. The second constraint is the 20% budget, for the rainy day budget. Now, I have looked at other cities around us, and many are at 20, some are at 13, 16, et cetera. It varies. We don't operate a full recreation department where a lot of liabilities come into play. We have insurance that covers any claim or lawsuit above $250,000 comes out of their pocket. We pay for that. Standard and Poor, when you go for bonding and whatever, they look for, they consider a good rainy day fund between 4 and 8%. And so there's money there that can be looked at from a policy standpoint. So your city manager is sitting here saying forget a structural deficit. I mean, structural deficit means we don't have $16 million sitting that can be spent if we need to spend it. That we have a self-imposed kind of deficit based on the Measure U legislation and et cetera. And so if council decides, as we get into the new budget, from a policy standpoint, that there needs to be certain programming that hasn't been done, Measure A funds is a good example, where we got $3.5 million sitting in Measure A that could be spent on streets, et cetera, and we get $1.5 million a year. Now, that's not general fund, but nonetheless, it's an opportunity to spend appropriate money for street improvements, sidewalks, et cetera. And on the general fund side, you may decide that additional positions are warranted. There would be cash to pay for that. But again, it depends on the council policy and how you want to restrict the spending of your general fund monies. And so this is something we'll talk about in the future. I haven't been present long enough to have gotten into those discussions when you adopted those resolutions. I need to share with you in the course of our budget discussions with Bonnie and Linda. We have been identifying all the city's money that it truly has in various funds, in general funds, et cetera. And it may astound you, but the investments show $69 million actual cash in the various funds to be budgeted at the end of the year, will be approximately $78 million of fund balance in all the funds. To me, that is not exactly a structural deficit. But we have to take a look at it. You have to take a look at it from a policy standpoint, see if adjustments need to be made, see if certain areas need to be targeted. We know the Measure A. We've addressed it with the engineering, and we're going to be coming in with projects, et cetera. So there's a lot to talk about, and we hope to have the budget to you by April 1.
For a first look on April 1?
We're going to try sooner. I don't know how to explain this part. Our software modules should talk to each other. HR should talk to payroll, should talk to finance, etc. What we've come to find, and if you look at the city, it's a triangle. Chris will smile at this, but at the bottom of it is all the infrastructure that's required to operate everything above it. And so software becomes just absolutely key. And so when I asked, for example, Lorena to give me a projection of if we continue to pay police and fire at the end of 10 years, what's it going to cost us? And so she's got to do it all by hand because she can't push a button. And, I expected it today. And so it's impossible to do because our software it's outdated. It doesn't talk to each other. And so a lot of our operations are hand to hand. And so it just takes time. Basically, we do everything off Excel. It takes time to generate answers to your questions, to my questions, etc. And so she's dancing as fast as I can make her dance. And we'll come as quickly as we can. I really hope we get it by the middle of March, but no later than the last meeting in March.
Well, and I think it's my concern, and certainly members of the council, with regard to, again, here we are March, almost into March, and we haven't had a workshop or it takes time, as you saw last year. We go through this every year. Come the 11th hour, we're trying to look through this thing as quickly as we can. It isn't a process that should be done in that way. So we were hoping to start that process no later than January, after it had been indicated that the process internally would be started in November. So it puts us in a really bad situation to look at something again at the 11th hour. So I hope that it can be done as soon as possible because we're already way behind the gate. So, and I think the other thing too is that what people keep forgetting is when the state took away our $11 million that we got every year for RDA, that took a big hit, as it did for every city. So to try and make up that funding is pretty darn difficult. So in any event, does council have any more comments or questions? Okay, with that I'll ask for a motion. I will move approval for resolution bill number 19-015, adjustments to the second quarter update.
I'll second.
Please vote. And that passes 3-2.
Thank you, council.
Next item is item number 10, future council agenda items. Status on each item. City Manager?
Yes, we have approximately 10 listed on the future agenda items. I've got some comments from me and members of the staff on each one. In some cases, we're asking it to be removed from the list. In other cases, we explain why it needs to be stated on the list. The first one was Healthy Communities Initiative, Councilwoman Krupa. brought this to us. No positive action was taken by the council, and West Riverside COG hasn't moved forward on it. Nonetheless, Linda and I talked today. There are cities moving ahead without this. There are gardens being done, there's social services being provided, etc. And so my recommendation would change, just to leave this on the list until, I guess, the grant situation and the possibility of us allocating some money for it moves forward. Perhaps you would like to add something?
Yes. The Healthy Communities Initiative that has been signed by most of the, I think, cities in California, it came down from the league as a suggestion on healthier living. We have, as a city, taken part in numerous ones of these activities while we never have officially adopted the resolution for the Healthy Cities Initiative. And while there isn't any funding available through RCOG at this point, there are other grants available and other healthy projects that are out in the communities. And I know the City of Paris has taken advantage of numerous ones as far as addressing community gardens and such things. And by having this resolution brought forward and adopting it, it puts the city of Hemet in a better position for future funding going forward.
And I'll follow up with that and say that even the things that we are hoping to do in the parks, there are so many funding opportunities for that, whether it be even just a walkable area, if it were a sidewalk around Weston Park, that those monies can be used for. Anything that would help initiate any healthy endeavor, even to the point where putting in the outside equipment for people to use. It will actually certainly help where the skate park is concerned. Anything that makes the community more healthy, bike paths, everything like that. There's so much funding out there for that it's a shame that we haven't passed this to date.
I would agree with that. Miguel Vasquez, I believe, is the gentleman at Riverside University Health Systems who is in charge of this Healthy Communities Initiative. And I do have his contact information. And Alan, I'll get it to you tomorrow to contact him and have him give us an updated version of what this could be brought back to council for consideration.
I do point out, or try to point out, that when these items remain on the agenda, it directs staff to allocate time, et cetera, to pursue whatever the projects are. And so that's why we're asking that rather than this be Linda's request, to do a council motion. And so it becomes a policy decision that directs us. So my recommendation on this would be to leave this item on the agenda, on the future agenda.
And I will relieve staff of their duty, and I will bring this to you so that you can put it on the agenda.
Okay. So if we could vote on each item?
After?
That's what I'm asking for, policy direction.
Okay.
Okay, with that, is there a motion?
Leave on the agenda.
Leave on the city manager. Yes, I would agree with the city manager to leave this one on the agenda.
I'll second that.
Please vote.
Nope, that wasn't a no.
Huh.
It was really a yes.
Okay.
I made the motion and said no.
Thank you. The second item, housing investment opportunities combined with city-owned properties, and this was originally requested by Councilman Percival. The recap that followed in the narrative was prepared by Deanna, and Deanna talks about potential projects would include workforce housing, hospital, et cetera. We've talked about providing hospital opportunities for residential for the people who work in the hospital, nurses, et cetera. There's a RHNA, Regional Housing Need Assessment requirements. There's a transit-oriented district, the mobility hub, There's just all kinds of incentives, the opportunity zone, and so our feeling was, after talking with Michael, and we're recommending that we keep in mind we have no staff person, yes, that we can, allocate full time to this, that this item should remain on the future agenda listing nonetheless.
Can I make a suggestion? Between WRCOG and other entities that provide college graduate interns that could help facilitate our staff, who may not have all the experience, but they certainly have, by their studies, have the ability to at least assist in this matter, and we rarely take advantage of the interns that are available for things like this. So rather than keep pushing it off because we don't have the staff to really take care of it, perhaps one way of dealing with it and pushing it forward is to be able to take advantage of some of those opportunities, especially with WRCOG and the fellowship program. These individuals would love to have that opportunity, number one, and it's a win-win for everybody. And I understand too, sometimes when somebody comes in like that, it's time-consuming for the staffer as well. But there's always a fit, and I think we should at least look into doing something like that.
I can only say that you're absolutely right on, and we are looking into it, both in terms of an intern and the fellowships. And so we are looking at that, and also doing a volunteer program, not only of the young people, but we should have a lot of senior citizens out there that have capabilities.
Well, I've brought up that for 2 years now. Okay. And I know that in some of the communities, such as Four Seasons and Del Webb, people have expressed their interest in helping the city because they were professionals at one time and have the desire to help wherever they can as a volunteer. So I hope, again, that that's just not something we talk about, and it's something we really help come to fruition.
Part of the conversation also was looking at some funding sources for a staff person or a part-time staff person, so we're still looking into that as a possibility.
So the motion would be to keep this item on the future agenda. I can't make the motion.
I'll make the motion to keep it on there.
And a second?
I'll second.
Please vote. And the motion passes 5-0.
Okay. Number 3, Scott Underwood wrote the paragraph. We've just retained PlanNet LLC, recommended to us by the City of Marietta and the City of Del Mar. The contract has just been signed with them. We feel this item needs to remain on the future agenda with monthly updates as to the progress being made. We feel like in 4 to 6 months we'll have this all resolved.
Are you looking for a motion now? Or
Yes, I am.
Well, I'll make the motion that we keep that on, and we get the monthly updates.
Just that the way the PA system's been going tonight is adequate incentive to keep this on and get it done as soon as possible.
For sure. Okay, is there a motion?
Yes, I made the motion.
Okay, second. Please vote.
Thank you. Fee schedule for nonprofit organizations. Deanna and Eric need specific council direction on this, and so here's our difficulty. We give Habitat. Chris and I have been talking about this tonight. We give Habitat for Community for Habitat for housing. We give them a $2,000 grant, and then they put on a fundraising thing, and we charge them $600 for a permit.
Right.
And this is exactly why I think it was Carly that brought this up initially with a fundraiser that somebody had, that was a nonprofit was giving, and what they had to pay otherwise just didn't make sense.
No,
So.
It doesn't make sense, and the difficulty is that we give $15,000 or whatever it is to the pageant, and then they come in and want to put on a special event, and they get charged for a permit. And so the difficulty, how do you determine in those cases that ought to be waived because we're funding them, and in those cases where a citizen comes in and wants to do a fundraiser at a park for, somebody that's ill or somebody, et cetera. And so Chris and I were talking about it, and we don't know what we would recommend and how you adopt an ordinance that has consistency in it and gives staff direction or enables you to make that decision. It tends to be, an ad hoc kind of decision depending on the group. And so in that case,
Well, there should be guidelines, but it shouldn't, but
It's a fee schedule, just like the water company posts online. Just like our regular fee schedule, there's the nonprofit fee schedule. They're gonna put up a shade, it's gonna be this amount, it's gonna be discounted a certain amount, something. It shouldn't be that difficult.
it is that difficult because it really falls into the political arena. It's very, very difficult to make a
Carter,
determination.
would you be agreeable to be on the ad hoc for that? To figure out a fee schedule?
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, I can do it when I get home tonight. It's not that, I mean, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I'll email you one.
Okay.
Well, I think there has to be a consensus between two council members and staff. So, I mean, you can certainly bring.
I don't know that I'm gonna come up with some magical schedule that we don't.
No, but it can collectively be discussed and perhaps come up with a guideline.
I guess if it's necessary, but it just seems like we're making it into a way bigger project than it needs to be.
If I could ask a couple questions, maybe I can narrow down what we're looking at. We don't have a special event ordinance in the city. Typically, we use a temporary use permit. People have to apply for and obtain and pay for the application cost for a temporary use permit. And so that could be one type of thing we're looking at, creating a fee or a waiver for nonprofits from that. That would be for the holding of an event itself. I know Councilmember Meyer has mentioned a shade structure. I'm not familiar with that specific instance, so I don't know if that's a building permit fee that was required for that. I didn't think we're talking about building permit fees or conditional use permit fees.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
We're talking about, it's not about events, it's about buildings. So, look, like at my city youth center, it costs them more for permits than it did the straight shade structure itself. So,
Yeah, that's what it was.
it's crazy that we do that if we're trying to work with inner city youth that are in trouble and trying to keep them off our streets and keep them busy. You think of all the different nonprofits that are, I mean, even at Valley Restart, they want to do a remodel. I mean, do we not have some sort of you're giving back to this community, you're a 501c3, they've been qualified by the state of California, this entitles you to this rate structure instead of...
We can do that. I just wanted to clarify whether we were talking about special events or whether we're talking about construction. And now that I know we're talking about construction, to what extent? Because there are a number of fees that go along with construction, not just the building permit fee, but there's inspection fees and a number of other types of things. And on what types of things? For example, years ago, Salvation Army built a very large facility. They required a conditional use permit, and then they had to go on and get building permits, and we had undergrounding of street lights, very expensive project. Are we talking about offering a zero fee cost for projects of that size, or is there some smaller thing that we're talking about? I'm just trying to get a sense of scale, because we can't just say zero for everything. But we probably can put our arms around a discounted fee, if you want, from the very most expensive building all the way down to a zero fee for, small structures or something. But when we discount a fee or we waive the fee, it comes out of the city's general fund without reimbursement. So it is, in essence, an additional contribution, which is fine. These are all for public purposes.
And I think, but that's why it needs to be vetted out and decided how it could work, because it has to be fair to everybody. And certainly we have to take into consideration the nonprofit. And that was a good example, that it cost more for the permits than it did for the shade structure. So I don't know how you figure all that out, but with staff and with, the considerations that we need to take into the process, there has to be a way to do it. So, and maybe it's just seeing what other cities do.
We certainly can work on that way there. We just need to kind of narrow down exactly what
Yeah.
we're talking about.
It's
And
not as easy as it sounds, I think.
It's not. And when we say nonprofits, we have to be very clear exactly what we're talking about in terms of nonprofits. Not all nonprofits are 501c3 charitable entities. And you might want an expanded definition, but keep in mind when we do that, now we're not able to just select certain nonprofits, and that might mean that there would be entities outside of town, or even that the population might find offensive, qualifying for a zero or discounted permit. And so those are just issues I think we need to dialogue about before we.
And maybe it's just
Right,
a matter of, too, in a lot of the grant solicitations, it'll have a phrase in there asking if, in fact, you want to request a waiver of, because of different things, whether you're a disadvantaged community or whatever the case may be. But there's guidelines towards that certain entities can ask for a waiver, and maybe that's the idea as well. So it's somewhat complicated, and it's going to take some real thought process to consider everything, to be fair. So.
Is this going to include, as Alan pointed out, with Habitat doing their event, and they're paying in fees half of what they're going to be raising? Can that be rolled into this, or is that two different entities and two different applications?
It's two different things. One's an event, and the other is related to construction or zoning, so it's probably three different things that we need to talk about. You all tell us what you want. We can work on any of those aspects. Construction,
I'd like to see
events, zoning.
I'd like to see if we can do some research with regard to if other cities are doing anything in this regard, and if so, what? And if they aren't, there's got to be a reason. I think there's a solution. I just don't know what it is, and it needs to be all vetted out because we want to be fair. And you're right. There are some instances. That's a perfect example. So.
We have Habitat for Humanity before us now. We have Ramona, their special event, before us now. I just received a request from a local nonprofit that would like to take a surplus van, one of the vans that we're turning in to sell at auction. They would like that. I sent out an SOS saying, do we have a process for that? I still don't know the answer on that yet. So there's a lot of different kinds of things that are from well-intentioned groups and groups you've supported in the past that come up with these additional fundraising kinds of things, or they want to build or anything like that. And then do you then set precedent if churches wish to come in or that whole thing is really
complicated.
It is very, very complicated.
Yeah.
So, but the first thing we were going to do after Eric, does his thing too, is we're going to contact other cities and get copies of ordinances and see how they handle.
Why reinvent the wheel? If somebody's doing it something fairly well and it's working. So
that's the city way.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we'll just leave that there.
Yeah, we could actually
Could we start with direction just to do that first? Do a little research on what other cities are doing, what times, and maybe come back with a report to you on that and get further direction?
Great. Would you like to do that by motion?
I certainly will.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll make that motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
No. Russ.
Thank you.
That motion passes 5-0.
Right. Public Safety Committee. Chief, you want to come up and present your memo to me? I'll put you in the hot seat on this.
Short agenda. This is long.
Good evening again. I just responded in request to the city manager's request for information on public safety committees. Back in 2010, I'm gonna end up. Back in 2010, we actually had committees for numerous departments. We had Public Works, we had emergency service, we had all kinds of different committees. So the committees were made up of 2 council members. We had to staff those committees. We had to have agendas. It took a lot of time and effort to get those together. We had, the meetings were always at strange times and strange places, it seemed like. And we ended up doing some major pet projects for the council members that were generally involved with that. My main concern is that when we brought those projects and things back to council, the other council members really gave off the opinion and the attitude that they would have liked to have been involved with the decision making at the start. So my experience with specifically with the Public Safety Committee was it was fairly ineffective, and we didn't have a whole lot accomplished out of that. So that was simply my suggestion to the city manager, that I didn't necessarily see a need for that. I know that the fire chief and myself try to really have an open door policy. I think we communicate well with council and the citizens. If there's a reason we need to do something differently, we can definitely do that. But I just didn't necessarily see a reason to have another meeting. Just my opinion.
Opinions?
Yeah, I agree with the chief, and I'll just make a recommendation, we remove this from the list.
I'll second that recommendation, and just some additional comment, because when we get into the council member reports, I've got a couple of commissions on my list of assignments, and so I can make a comment relative, because it kind of ties together commission and committees. So I'll just make a broad statement now that I think, especially in light of the fact that we have vacant positions, we're understaffed, and we have good staff, and they're running that squirrel cage as fast as they can. And I think I'm more focused on results than process, and I think staff is likewise focused. And so when we have a situation, whether it's a commission that hasn't met for a year, or committee that nobody really knows for sure what it's supposed to be doing, it's tying up staff time, and there isn't a results product that comes out the other end. So philosophically, I think looking at the way we do business, it's better left alone and keep it simple, and let's focus on results. So I wholeheartedly agree with the chief's recommendation and assessment.
I have experience with every department, almost like the commission form of government, where council members, individual members, were assigned to various departments, and every department, and it created silos. The Public Works Department would work with the 1 or 2 council people assigned to them. They could go over the city manager or under the city manager and make directions, directly to them. The council people sometimes gave directions that were not validated by the entire council, so it can really screw up the open dynamics that we currently have now. And so I'm supporting the recommendation too.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. That would be to remove it from the list. That motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, Chief. Now, to address Russ's comments, we have talked about it, and a Public Works Committee, a Parks Commission, and a Traffic Commission. This will all be embodied in one. The staff would come back to you how to do it. We would call it a Facilities and Infrastructure Committee to present the alternative committee to the council at a future work study session on how it would be actually formed. But
So if I can just have a motion on that, and we'll move on that.
I would move that city manager's recommendation.
I'll second that. And again, I'd like to just comment on that, and I had some conversation with our new city engineer, and I do believe that in some cases, there is a value added to having a properly structured and representative commission, because it creates a pathway for citizenry to bring issues forward and allow a hearing and discussion and most generally a resolution of their issue. So there is a value added that there's a good end product out of it. So under the heading of results oriented, I think it's perfectly a valid process to have commission. And I really like the concept that we're taking a fresh look at these commissions and seeing where there's possibility to blend them, because I know that they can serve a very useful purpose in municipal governance.
I agree, because these commissions in the past were real vital commissions and very active. So I don't know how they kind of went by the wayside per se, and yet something that still needs to be in place. So if it's because it needs to be restructured, then that's how we should that's how we should move forward, I believe. So is the recommendation, your recommendation then to restructure, look at these and bring the restructure back?
And I second it.
Okay, please vote. And that motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
To be clear, this is all in one now? That's going to be all in one, or is it going to be two separate ones?
No, all in one.
Still going to stand by your vote? Okay.
As long as it's not me on there, then it's fine.
Measure Z was the cannabis measure that was just passed by the community, asked to be placed. We have to get moving on this, and so I'm asking that we be allowed to contact both HDL and RSG, both of us who have worked for us, both firms, for recommended next steps in a proposal format, and we will return to council with the two proposals along with our recommendations.
Yes, I would make a motion to support that.
I'll second that.
Recommendation.
Please vote. I second it.
Thank you. Number 8, vagrancy and panhandling laws. We want this to remain on a future agenda. Eric can tell you why.
Oh, I just for the record want to mention that passed 5-0. Sorry. Okay.
Vagrancy and panhandling laws. Al Ford of my office, Al Ford does a lot of the code enforcement work with the city, also works with the police department on pitches, motions, and other things. He's been working with his parallel in the police department, and they have gone through the various vagrancy, camping, and other similar types ordinances, and we've come up with a list of what we think are additions, deletions, and modifications that need to be done to bring our provisions into conformance with the law. Primarily, they relate to two different things. One, there's some inconsistencies with regard to the penalty provisions across a number of these. We need to update that and unify those so that the police department has options from administrative to infractions to misdemeanors to enforce them. And then, of course, we need to deal with the Boise case that had to do with anti-camping. City of Reading has adopted a new ordinance that they're hopeful will pass that standard, so we'd like to look at that as kind of a model to follow. It might require some data, but what I'd like to do at a future agenda is come back and identify the specific sections of the code that need to be amended and kind of our take on how to address the Boise case and the camping case. Or I could just go simply straight to working on preparation of an ordinance that cleans all of that up, along with a staff report. It really depends on how you'd like to proceed. You don't mind doing the intermediate step.
I was supposed to meet with the chief on this, and I had to. It was the day of the flooding, so that was exciting. But I would be interested in still talking with him and giving him some ideas too, because on the angle of working with homeless people and seeing, and sometimes it's fearful to go out on a limb on things and offer things that they will never accept. And I think that there are some things that we can,
Okay,
build
given
into
that, and to facilitate that conversation, maybe I can bring back a report or a work study at a future agenda that identifies those and takes into context some of the other approaches that are out there.
I'm glad you mentioned Reading and the Boise decision, because they seem to have somehow crafted their camping ordinance that they can enforce without being in violation of the Boise decision.
So they say.
So they say.
I
Exactly.
haven't been challenged on it yet, but we'll see. But we're certainly going to look at it. A lot of it, of course, depends on the data that we have here, because their data and situation might be completely different than ours, and that's one of the things we need to drill down on a little bit.
But we're still in the state of California.
We're still in the state of
Both
California.
are.
So can we have a motion to keep
Yeah,
this on the?
I'd like to move that we retain this item and bring it back for a study session.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Please vote.
Something dropped. There we go.
That motion passes 5-0.
The last item has to do with opportunity zones and creating partnerships with developers. Both Eric and Deanna have taken a look at this and have informed me. We have an opportunity zone in Hemet based on census tract data. That's how it's established. As I read, what's out on the opportunity zone, it takes some sort of community action agency within the zone, as well as a development partner also within the zone. And then I read Los Angeles, and they've established it with a community action agency outside the city, and the partners are all outside the city. So maybe the big cities get to play different. I don't know. So there's a Get Ready guide, and Eric has suggested that we review the Get Ready guide and return to council with any information that could be gleaned as to how the city may be able to take advantage of this legislation. Therefore, this item needs to remain on the list. Last motion.
Motion.
I'll move to keep it on the list.
Second.
Please vote. And that motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Almost everything's on the list.
We only got rid of one.
That's a start.
Got rid of
Well,
one,
it just
we're
goes to
bringing
show you
one
how
back.
important they really were.
There you go. Okay. Next are city council reports. Oh, but I do. I do. Councilmember Kuba. Very quickly. RCTC, we had Budget and Implementation Committee meeting yesterday, and I was selected as the new chair of the RCTC Budget and Implementation Committee. We are also going to be looking at prioritizing projects for the next 5 to 10 year cycle of Measure A funds, and I have support from many neighboring cities to move the realignment of Highway 79 up into the funding category. So we're still pushing for that. Now we need to get the community back out there and making noise about it. The Ramona Bowl Association, their winter visitor special presentation is Saturday, March 16th. The library, this coming Saturday, March 2nd at 2 p.m. in the Story area is Read Across America. You may be familiar, in prior years it was the Dr. Seuss Day, and while a lot of Dr. Seuss is still being read, it's being enlarged as a Read Across America. League of California Cities General Meeting will be in Desert Hot Springs on March 11th. I think you all received the email on the announcement of that, and the main speaker will be the guru of cannabis. Water board meeting was yesterday. Got a lot of information on damage to the settling ponds that was done because of the rains that we have had. But we renewed our contracts with EMWD to repair those ponds and get the recharge going. And we also had elections. I was reelected as chair. Mayor Russatz from San Jacinto was elected vice chair, and secretary treasurer was Phil Pauley from EMWD. And I had something else on here. Saturday is also the Habitat for Humanity Marathon at Diamond Valley Lake. And I think that's it. That's it.
Okay. Councilmember Meyer.
Let's see. Well, we pretty much went over the Investment Oversight Committee, so I guess that's really the details of what we have. But that's all.
Councilmember Percival.
Planning Commission was canceled for the meeting on the 19th. The meeting for RCA, the Regional Riverside Conservation Authority, is on Monday. And then I do want to point out one thing with that's coming up on Saturday at Diamond Valley Lake is the, I just had it here, let me pull it up. Saturday at Diamond Valley Lake is the Diamond Valley Lake Run for the Habitat for Humanity. How convenient, we were talking about that earlier.
And I just announced it, but that's okay.
Oh, you did, I wasn't paying attention. All right. And I just said, and I said to you, let me announce that. But anyway, okay. To reiterate what Linda said.
No, announce it, because you got to wait a minute, I was going to announce it.
But okay, so I've got the flyer, and I can probably announce some things that she didn't. There will be food and beverage there. Perfect Zero Champagne, Califino Tequila, Maria Coffee, NanoCraft, 8-Bit Brewing Company will be there, Wines Brewery, El Patron, Lemongrass, Clamatos Miguel, Healthy Hangout, Drive by Level, just to name a few. There will be DJ there. There will be a bunch of things for the kids to do. So if you're not busy on Saturday.
And if after all that you can run.
No, the run starts in the morning, so the run is early. All of this stuff starts at...
If you survive the run, you can come back and eat and drink.
Yeah, this is from 10 to 3. So to reiterate what she said that I wasn't really paying attention. I'll be there in the morning, and then I'm leaving because I have to be somewhere else at 9 o'clock. But that's all I have.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Okay. I've been having a series of discussions with our fire chief and our emergency services coordinator, and talking about conceptually the direction to go relative to our what we're carrying on there, the Disaster Planning Commission. The consensus that the three of us have arrived at, and I'm kind of looking for maybe some head nod consensus from council, that rather than take the route of a full-blown commission, because previous attempts of that haven't really gotten off the ground, and they were either unwieldy or, for whatever reason, not productive. And moving in more in a direction of an advisory committee of stakeholders in the community, obviously people who would have key roles in planning for and responding to and mitigating any kind of a catastrophic disaster. So I think that is in keeping with the direction that I think would be beneficial to the city at large, and in some ways even perhaps looking at not just a city approach, but maybe consider regional impacts as well, because we are indeed in a valley, and something catastrophic that would impact our city would likely impact the valley too, and so mutual aid issues come into play there. So I'd like to see if my colleagues on council are in agreement that an approach of some kind of an advisory committee with decision-making stakeholders represented, and providing some direction on moving forward with updating our